Now, extremism was on the ballot in a number of hotly contested primary races on both sides of the aisle. And you know I love to call out the extremists. Democratic extremists were up for election in a number of key contests, and overall, even it was a bit of a mixed bag for the hyperpartisans, but the biggest victory for extremism came in Oregon, where Blue Dog Democratic Congressman Kurt Schrader appears to be on the verge of losing to his progressive challenger, Jamie McLeod Skinner, who attacked Schrader as the Joe Manchin of the House during the campaign. The race has yet to be officially called because of issues with some of Oregon's mail-in ballots, but the prognosis is grim for Schrader, who currently trails by more than 20 points. But moderation prevailed in another key contest out west, as Brad Little turned away a challenge from Trump-supported extremist candidate Janice McGeachin in the race for governor of Idaho. Little dominated the race with a staggering margin of victory, approaching 40 points. Meanwhile, back in Pennsylvania, another recount appears imminent in a closely monitored Democratic House race. Progressive candidate Summer Lee had the backing of many of the extremist all-stars on the left, scoring endorsement from squad members Ilhan Omar, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. And yet all that leftist firepower couldn't propel her to a clear victory. The latest count shows Lee ahead by a handful of votes over her more moderate opponent, Steve Irwin. And Republican extremists were dealt a blow in the big Senate showdown, as far-right candidate Kathy Barnett finished in a clear third place behind Mehmet Oz and David McCormick. But far-right gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano romped over his more moderate opponent Lou Barletta in a race where former President Trump jumped on the Mastriano bandwagon as late polls showed him opening up a lead. It was a mixed bag for extremism in North Carolina, as the Trump-supported far-right candidate Ted Budd was victorious over former Governor Pat McCrory in the Republican primary for Senate. But scandal-plagued far-right Congressman Madison Cawthorn will lose his seat. He went down in the primary to his more establishment opponent, Chuck Edwards. So, what is the takeaway here? On the one hand, it's easy for moderates to be discouraged by the defeats of Kurt Schrader or the victory of Mastriano. Losing Schrader and replacing him with someone much further to the left be a tough blow for Congress, which needs all the reasonable voices it can get. But on the other hand, these are primaries. Many of the candidates are pandering to the far left and the far right. Extremism may be rewarded in primaries. It's often a liability in general elections. To help us assess whether extremism prevailed last night, let's bring in Chris Stirewalt, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, contributing editor at The Dispatch. Chris has been calling these races for decades. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, so what do you make of last night's result? Better night for the extremists or for the moderates?
Well, it was a good night for fake extremism, maybe. An interesting thing is happening inside the Republican Party. You have to act crazy if you're normal in order to try to win your primary in some cases. And I think when we look at Pennsylvania and those clips that you played about both Oz and McCormick talking about the election, you could hear the pandering, you can hear the eliding that McCormick was doing when he said, people are concerned about the integrity of the elections, didn't say that they were right, and then said, but we need to reassure them even if they're wrong, basically. And it's that kind of pandering that opens up the space for more extremism because you're winking at it and you're nodding at it. But look, I got to say overall, the big race for me, the underappreciated race, was the one that you highlighted in Idaho, Idaho, one of the fastest growing states in the country, Boise, the fastest growing city in the country, a rapidly changing, growing Idaho. The idea that Janice McGeachin was going to challenge a sitting governor and the fact that Donald Trump would back her, we looked at that for a moment and said, because she's very radical, right? She is a militia kind of radical. She is way out there. What's going to happen there? And the voters in Idaho brushed her back, Republican voters in Idaho. And remember, this is a very conservative state, brushed her back. I think that was a very significant race because it showed that in most of the cases, and I think this is borne out in Pennsylvania, I think it's borne out in North Carolina, what Donald Trump has done this cycle is look for the eventual winner. You mentioned how late he came to Mastriano's aid. Only after it was clear that Mastriano was going to be the winner of the gubernatorial primary in Pennsylvania did Trump get on board. So most of the time he's following, not leading, and I don't think extremism had a particularly good week.
All right, that's mostly from the right. What about from the left? What about the left-wing extremism? How did they do last night?
Look, I obviously the Schrader situation, that's a pretty sick burn in Democratic circles these days to call somebody the Joe Manchin of the House. I think there are a lot of Americans who are not Democrats who wish that there were more Joe Manchin kind of figures in the House, more conciliators who wanted to bring people together. But overall, the once vaunted claims from the squad, from Bernie Sanders, from Elizabeth Warren, that the primary challenges this year were going to sweep Democrats from power have proven to be bogus. Schrader may go down. But overall, I think that the threats of the extremists on the Democratic left have been unproven and unfounded this year.
Chris Stirewalt, thanks a lot for coming on. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.